Hi guys, Luton here, and back for another episode with I'm No Philosopher. Now, this is a series where I talk about things that I'm just kind of thinking about, and it could be gaming related, it could not be gaming related, and it is today, funnily enough. And really what I'm thinking about is actually kind of where games are going, and that's from a indie slash amateur to AAA standpoint. Where are we coming from? Where is the focus? And I saw an article a little while back sort of related to this, but I think it would be fair to say that, you know, with Battlefield, a lot of people kind of came into it with they didn't get the expectation that they wanted to out of the game. But I don't think that solely applies to Battlefield. I think that is actually a wider trend, and you know, it's very interesting how things have developed when you look back sort of 15 years ago when I was starting to kind of get more into gaming, I guess, than just what you would call a casual thing. And it's really interesting how that has developed and changed. And one of the things that had been made mention was of the fact that sort of medium level games had kind of disappeared more, you know? And when we talk about medium level games, we're thinking about the kind of stuff, the kind of stock titles you might get with something like the PS2, okay? So those kind of middle of the road titles which kind of fill everything in. And, you know, there'd always be some like classic gems in there. And often those kind of middle ground games would be the kind of staging points for kind of higher, stronger, you know, they'd be kind of like the foundation of what could then forward on into, you know, larger developers. I remember Naughty Dog, for example. I mean, obviously everyone always enjoyed their games, but I don't think I would have described some of the early Naughty Dog games as AAA. But then you go forward now through to something like The Last of Us, and it really feels like AAA. And so, you know, where are we coming from with this kind of thing? And those kind of middle of the ground games kind of disappeared for a while. They didn't disappear, but they had no presence, you know, because suddenly there was this huge focus on indie games. Okay, you got stuff like Minecraft, you got a lot of things like, you got awesome games like FTL coming out, all these different titles, okay, from indie. There's way too many to mention. We know there's like a litany of indie titles out there. There's so many really fantastic things, and they're getting better like all the time. I mean, it's I think indie games in many ways have kind of moved on already from where they actually originally were. You know, they've kind of become way more professional than they used to be, and that's a fascinating thing as well in itself. You know, maybe are they developing a new thing? In fact, I actually saw the other day someone saying that, you know, indie games shouldn't necessarily be called indie. They're not really like, you know, they've already transitioned from that phase into something else now, because they're a lot more slick, a lot more professional, a lot more titles getting pushed through Kickstarter and things like that. So it is kind of interesting to see where we go. But then we come back to another thing. We come back to, obviously, the studio closure around BioShock Infinite, okay, and that was like a really big deal, okay, for that studio to close at that time was quite a significant thing, especially after a title like BioShock Infinite, which had such critical acclaim. But then again, I think there's more actually going on sort of behind the scenes there with Irrational Games. I think there's more at hand than just what was said. But basically, with Irrational Games and closing down there, a lot had been said, though. The main focus was on the fact that narrative games don't sell so well. It's an interesting point to make, but here's the thing. I don't think it's necessarily the case that narrative games don't sell well. I think it's simply that gamers' appetites have been pushed really hard towards different directions, you know? And so that kind of middle ground game kind of got phased out. Now, I wouldn't call BioShock Infinite a middle ground game because of the production values and the sort of work that went into it there. But it's kind of like the question is, can you have a narrative title at a AAA level? I think you can, because look at something like The Last of Us. Last of Us, massive critical acclaim, has done very, very well, and it's a PS exclusive on top of that. So it wasn't even a full release in the true sense of the word. So that's a very, very interesting thing there, that you can look at those two things. BioShock Infinite, same kind of production level, same kind of massive release, didn't do very well. Last of Us has gone from strength to strength Same kind of, again, high production values, but it's an exclusive title rather than a full release. So that was a very curious thing there, that those two titles trade off against one another. But what it got me onto thinking was, hey, look, the middle ground games, which have that kind of middle level production, middle level budget, middle level advertising, okay, they're sort of something you might see and go, oh yeah, I might try that, but you don't sort of get super excited about it. And then you play it and, you might find a gem, or you just kind of play it and put it to one side. I think that was one thing as well, is that, in the past, obviously, I think that the nature of gaming and the way in which gaming is presented towards people has changed so significantly. Because in the past, there was not so much of the online aspect, whereas now the online aspect has become like the core thing. It used to be that, as we were moving into that phase, that perhaps, a game may have an online element, but it wasn't sort of the primary thing. It was almost like tacked on at the end, like, oh, and here's a bit of multiplayer. Now, it's almost turning the other way. We're going like, here's the multiplayer aspect, we've put so much content into it, all DLCs, etc., and oh yeah, here's the campaign. They've kind of changed it around. And I wonder whether that kind of change in people's nature and appetites has then had a direct impact towards kind of narrative and sort of what people are expecting right there. But then, I think we're going to have this resurgence, because I think people are starting to move away, people are alienated, people are frustrated with the kind of AAA aspect, the AAA online aspect, DLCs in your face all the time, free to play, microtransactions. And again, everyone has personal tastes and feelings about these different kind of things. Like for me, microtransactions, I never feel it's that big a deal, because you can pay for it if you want or you can't, it's up to you. So I don't really feel like it's that big a deal. But for some people, they hate it, like just having it even in the game is kind of like a spoiler for them. But then, as I say, sort of, you then look at indie games, and indie games often cheap to buy, often they have to have strong narrative content because they don't have the graphical budgets and so on to prop the game up. So they have to have the strong narratives there. But what's interesting is when you get some titles that have done well at an indie level, may then go forward a little and have more development, more backing, and you end up with a title that is not so much of an indie title, but it's gone on to another stage, and that's when you come to a kind of middle of the road title. And I think that area, which has been neglected for quite a while now, because we've kind of gone in this weird phase where you kind of have just the kind of indie focus, and then everyone's interested in the big games. Because, I mean, think about it, when somebody says, oh, what games are you interested in this year, you don't list those kind of middle ground games. I can't even think any really off the top of my head that I would classify in that aspect. Not immediately to hand anyway. I don't know. No, I'm just looking over to my side here and I see like Tomb Raider, and Tomb Raider is a big release and it's had loads of variation and sort of things going on with that. I don't think I would classify it as like a AAA title so much. I mean, it's a big game, but I don't know, it's kind of upper middle class, shall we say. But no, the point that I'm getting towards though is that I think things are going to change around in terms of where people's focus is, from what they want to pay, what they expect to get out of a game, and again, how strong the narrative may be. Narratives often are classically pretty bad in gaming. They often are quite shocking, and I've got to pull up my example of Last of Us, because Last of Us still... I feel really bad actually for people who haven't played Last of Us either on the PC or if they're just solid Xbox players. Last of Us, I really put up there as probably one of the top games I've ever played. Not so much from a mechanical point of view, but purely from the story narrative aspect. And I don't want to get all pretentious on you and be all like, oh yeah, it's so amazing with Ellie and Joel, but it was a very well put together game, and the narrative was quite adult and it played out well, and the characters worked well with one another, and it was just a fluid, very kind of viscerally interesting title, and so you've really felt absorbed in the characters and in the emotion of it all, and that's something that I think is really, really key and important with games. But it can happen in all different ways as well. You look at something like Journey, and Journey, I don't think you classify Journey as like a kind of an indie game title as much, but it's definitely on the kind of fringes. It's because it had no sort of real, I guess, full-on strong multiplayer gameplay. It wasn't that kind of same sort of thing. It was like a kind of experience, a passage, and you kind of were just along for the ride, and you make your own conclusions off of that. So it's quite a different thing in there. But there's some great studios out there that are sort of more middle, and I think of Pixel Junk. Pixel Junk Studios, Q Games, okay? You guys know that I love the Pixel Junk title series, like Pixel Junk Shooter, Eden, and then, of course, their new one, Nom Nom Galaxy, which I did the stream for this week, which is a hilarious game and also incredibly stressful at a Pikmin level. But so, again, those kind of studios kind of putting a lot of content out there. There's also another really good thing with middle ground studios, which is that, because of the way in which they work, they're not necessarily... I mean, of course, they want to have a super strong title that does really, really well, but they're more inclined to experiment, Large studios, which are very large, almost, they kind of can't fail because of the budgets involved and, the level of expectation there, because they're right at the very top of the game. So the title almost can't fail. And I think that's kind of what happened with Irrational. Like, BioShock, critically acclaimed, but sort of didn't do so well there, and it kind of killed the studio. It's an interesting one. I mean, I wonder as well, sort of from the Battlefield 4 release and what's happened there, what DICE are taking away from that behind closed doors, what they'll take from that through obviously into Battlefront. And Battlefront is obviously going to be the next massive title that people are looking towards. Now, what does Battlefront hold for us? We don't know. What does it hold in terms of release for EA and DICE? We don't know as well. I'm going to be... it's very obvious that these titles are going to sell massively well. I mean, Star Wars, DICE, Battlefront. I mean, just the three things. It's going to sell big. It's going to sell big. But it's more sort of how much support does it get from the community. And as I say, I feel very much like people are kind of alienated, frustrated. I mean, you only have to look around at YouTube producers for Battlefield and know that people are not as happy as they were, and then that obviously will filter through to the community. I think the game is, Battlefield is still an enjoyable game, but I think perhaps because of the way in which it was released, it's kind of not been so smooth there. And as I say, you can take that on its own, or, as I say, I think you can lead that into a larger trend of people's kind of frustration, disillusionment. They're kind of, all the time people get hit with these massive hype trains, these huge teaser things. It goes on for months and months and months, and then they actually get the title. And in many ways, I think for a lot of people, unless you are very strong and you can keep your feet on the ground, a lot of people's expectations get pushed so high that when the game actually comes, it can never meet their expectations or what they would imagine it to be in terms of quality. Whereas, again, a middle ground game, you don't get that so much. And so I can't predict entirely what every single person or whatever is going to do, but I do feel that middle ground gaming is going to come back a bit, because I think there's been a lot of love for the indie section, and medium gaming is kind of really just a development on from that. Okay, it's not a massive jump between indie to medium sort of level gaming, medium level game production. There is a big gap from medium to AAA because of the production values associated, because of the development times associated, and the whole kind of, theatre around it all. For medium, it's really just kind of indie with a bigger budget. And I think with that, then you can get kind of some much more interesting stuff happening, because they have a little bit more power to push into the actual mechanics and gameplay, and obviously the graphics as well. They have a little bit more time to play with the narratives and all the different things that are happening right there. So I'll be really interested to look and see over this next year where it goes with that. I think indie, whilst the games keep churning out, I think people kind of do get a little worn with indie stuff sometimes, because the games can sometimes be kind of short. Sometimes after you play a lot of them, you kind of be like, yeah, okay, I kind of get it. They couldn't do this, they couldn't do that. You're a little bit frustrated sometimes because you kind of can see almost what could be, but it never quite got to that point. Well, medium level games are that next step. It's kind of, they fill in those bits that you could do, but it's not quite the top end. So I don't know. I mean, personally, me myself, I think I'm going to be more inclined to experiment and look at these kind of more mid-range priced titles, other things that are coming around at that point. So there we go, guys. That's my thoughts really about this kind of medium level stuff today. I'm sorry, by the way, if it's a little bit vague. I hope it's not too vague. I didn't sort of have any time to sort of sit down and trawl through hundreds of titles trying to find specific examples saying, yeah, this is a good example of a medium title, this is. I can totally do that. In fact, I may well go and do that and say, okay, look, coming into the middle of 2014, these are the kind of examples of things that I'm thinking about. I probably will do that. But this evening I was kind of trying to work out what I was going to do, and I just just kind of was like, yeah, this is something I've been thinking about for a while. Kind of when I go to and from work, I'm often thinking about sort of video ideas and sort of stuff that I want to talk about. And this idea that the kind of middle ground resurgence is going to come back again is something that I've definitely been thinking about. So it's more kind of like a trend, a principle, rather than necessarily needing to say like, okay, this is a game that's going to be big. That's not really where I'm coming from with this. It's more kind of like gaming community trends. So I feel very much like personally people are starting to move away from this AAA stuff, but there's all this talk about is narrative dead in gaming. Are people, especially after Irrational, that was really like the keystone there, and people feel like, okay, that's broken now, so is there really this appetite there? And I say, yeah, I think there is. I'm a massive supporter of narratives in games. For me, it's often the core of it. If you have a strong narrative and a good mechanical gameplay, that's a winner right there. And that's the thing. Graphics, it's not all about the graphics. I think people have got so obsessed with graphics, and graphics is often, the real sort of benchmark for AAA titles. It's like, unbelievable graphics, but then the other bits and pieces, it's not so, whatever, okay? Whereas, middle of the road games, this is the other thing, they often can't have those top end graphics, so they rely on the narrative, they rely on the gameplay, and if you can get those strong aspects, you can really sort of be onto something pretty special. So again, I'm going to go away, I'm going to sort of think about some titles. If you have any titles yourself, good examples of kind of what you would consider middle of the road games, which are maybe not on everybody's radar, but are very strong titles, feel free to throw them down below, and I may take those on board and sort of discuss around them a bit in the next video when I bring this back again. Just to talk a little bit about this gameplay as well. It sort of didn't pan out for me too well in the beginning, but it did overall come together. But it's some pretty intense action on the carrier there. I'm going to have a lot more sort of Battlefield stuff coming out this week, because I kind of neglected it a little bit the past few days, but got a ton of armor stuff I want to do. Armor just keeps coming back to me all the time right now, and I've got so many ideas and thoughts and stuff that I can do with that. I've been super enjoying it, so bit more on that as well on the way. Also DayZ, we're going to be throwing back into that a little bit. I've got some stuff set up what I want to do in the next couple of weeks with that, so it's all to play for, it's all to come. So if you enjoyed today, guys, drop it a little like. I'll see you next time for a little bit more Battlefield 4.